Ask any gardener which vegetable they can do without in the garden, and most times you're going to get the answer tomatoes. And growing good tomatoes starts at the very beginning. So in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about these tomato halos and why they are so fantastic at growing tomatoes for you. I'm Tony O'Neill and this is Simplified Gardening, where I show you how to garden in a simpler way. We all love growing tomatoes, and one of the most common reasons why a lot of people get disease and pests is because of improper watering and feeding. Now, these tomato halos will stop all of that fuss, and I'm going to show you how. But before I do that, I think it's important to look at why a lot of people fail at growing tomatoes. You see, tomatoes have really fine feeder roots on their root system, and it's these feeder roots that allow the tomatoes to take up the water and nutrients. When tomatoes are allowed to dry out, then these feeder roots die and wither, and because of that the tomatoes don't take up the nutrients and the moisture that's required. And when this happens, the tomatoes seem to stop growing, and a lot of diseases can kick in, like blossom end rot and blight. Now, when people get blossom end rot, a lot of people think that this is a magnesium deficiency, and it can be, but more often than not it's down to irregular watering and those root systems from decaying and dying off, and then the plant is unable to take up that nutrients that is required, and then hence the blossom end rot kicks in, or you get early and late blight because the tomato is stressed. And that's where these tomato halos come in, because what these do is they allow you to ensure that the tomatoes are getting adequate moisture without overwatering, because they act on a wicking system. And the reason this is important is if the plants are allowed to dry out and then you give them a lot of water, this can cause a major uptake in moisture, and it causes the splitting of the tomato fruits too. So getting that watering correct is of paramount importance, and that helps you avoid all of these issues. How do we use these halos? Well, the manufacturers will tell you to push these little feet into the soil and just sit it on the surface of the soil. But, and there's a big but that comes with this. You see, these halos, they were designed to be used in grow bags, in tomato grow bags, and that was where the depth of soil is really shallow, and they were designed to give it more depth. But also the soil in those tomato grow bags, it's encased in plastic, which helps to stop it from drying out. When growing in soil or beds like I am, then it's important to sink the tomato halos and bury them half their depth, because tomatoes, well, they have quite shallow root systems. Well, the feeder roots are anyway. Now, if we just sat this on the surface of the compost or the soil or wherever it is, our beds, like the manufacturers suggest, well, that's going to be at the surface level, and the tomato is going to grow out the bottom, and it's going to send its roots out across the surface of the soil, and that's no good for tomatoes, because they already throw their roots out at the surface as it is, and the closer to the surface, the more prone they are to drying out, and they don't do well in the hot summer sun. By burying it half its depth, you force that tomato to send the roots out a little bit deeper. Now, the only reason I say half its depth is because I use a mulch in my garden too, and that can then take you up to the surface level, and the mulch will also help to prevent those roots from drying out. I bought these tomato halos a number of years ago from Oakland Gardens, and they are fantastic. They're really durable. I've been using them for years, and the good thing about them is they will really last for year after year after year. Now, Oakland Gardens have been good enough to do a 10% discount for our viewers, and if you want to buy those, you can simply do that by adding code SIMPLIFYHALO at checkout. I'll leave a link in the description below for Oakland Gardens, and you can get across there and get some yourself. They are fantastic. So while we're at this, let's get on with the rest of the video. So before we even consider planting our tomatoes or other fruit and vegetables like cucumbers and melons, we need to think about a support structure. Now, handily, the tomato halos, they have these little holes built in that are designed to take canes, and also it comes with this little insert and it allows you to attach the canes, and then all you simply have to do is spread the canes out between these 3 holes and you have your support structure in place. Obviously you'd use longer ones depending on what plant you're using. Another option you would have is you could place a single cane right into the center and grow it up a single cane. Or you can do what I'm doing here, and I'm running a string from the crop bars above down into the hole, and we're going to wind the tomatoes around that string, and I find that to be one of the most effective ways when using this. Now is a perfect time to place some slow release fertilizer in the hole. Something like blood, fish and bone meal would be ideal. Mix this with the soil at the bottom of the hole, as this will also help the roots to drive downwards. I will then place the tomato plant into the hole. Remember, a tomato will root up the entire length of its stem. These fine hairs will all become roots if they come into contact with the soil, so burying the plant nice and deep will help push those roots down further. Fill up the halo to about ½ an inch below the rim, and that's the tomatoes in their final growing spots with their support systems in place. Now, this is where the tomato halos will come into their own, because they will help to prevent some of the disease and pests that we spoke about earlier. And the reason for this is they have a nice big reservoir that'll hold a couple of days worth of water. And this acts like drip irrigation, because what it does is it pulls water into the soil like a capillary action, and this allows the plants to pull the water down as and when they need it, so it prevents you from overwatering. But it also helps to prevent evaporation. Not only are we using a mulch on the soil, it's also driving that water below the soil surface so it can't evaporate off, and this is a fantastic way in which to water your plants effectively and not waste moisture that would otherwise go up into the atmosphere. So when you're feeding your tomatoes, that goes into where the soil section is, and that allows the feed to get right above the root system and drop down onto it. And it's important that when you initially plant the tomatoes that you also water in that top section too, and that'll allow the root system to get water for about the first 10 days, because those roots haven't gone down below the halo yet. They will get down there, but it'll take them about 10 days to push down. So for the first 10 days, water in the top, they'll make sure that they are adequately watered, and then after 10 days you can just fill up the halo as I've just shown you. If you found value in this video, you can subscribe here, and if you want to learn more about growing tomatoes, I've got a full in-depth guide right here. But even better than that, if you go to simplifygardening.com, I have a free ebook all about growing tomatoes, and you could just download that from the right hand column. I'm Tony O'Neill, this is Simplified Gardening, where I show you how to garden in a simpler way. Remember folks, you reap what you sow, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.